Before Victorian times, prisons were more like dens of iniquity than houses of correction. After a visit to Newgate Jail in 1836, inspectors reported shocking findings. They'd seen a body of criminals of every class engaged in riot, debauchery and gaming. Newgate wasn't unique. Most prisoners had access to gin shops and prostitutes. In fact, your life as a prisoner depended on how rich you were, because you had to pay the jailers. So if you had lots of money, you got better conditions. In fact, if you could afford it, you could live in the governor's house. You could even pay for somebody else to serve your sentence for you. The inspector's report horrified Parliament and the nation. Regardless of expense, a new penal system had to be developed. A system dedicated to moral regeneration. In the early 1840s, the Victorians built new prisons of an unprecedented size, like this one in Leeds. Behind the traditional facade hides a state-of-the-art Victorian building designed to keep large numbers of prisoners segregated and under constant view.
If you looked above from where we stood now, it's like looking on a bicycle wheel, and the four wings are going off from the hub. You've got control of the environment on each wing. So if there's any, for example, an incident on one wing, the person in charge of the prison can see what's going on and direct staff to that area. No blind spots, for example. It's an overall view of what's going on in the prison at that time.
The accommodation wings were built to house hundreds of prisoners, each locked in his own cell.
The cell itself is physically the same as it was a long while ago. And interestingly enough, in this establishment, several prisoners prefer to be on this side of the prison and in a cell like this than they would to a cell that was built about 10 years ago.
Victorian prisons were built to enforce a new penal system. For prisoners, it was out with gambling and women and in with punishment and retribution, a regime known as solitude and servitude. Victorian prisons were crowded, but for the prisoner, solitude meant isolation. They weren't allowed to speak to one another, and they had to wear these Scotch caps, pulled low down so they weren't recognisable. The only form of identification was a number on the otherwise anonymous prison uniform. Servitude meant hard work, and the prisoners had a huge range of ludicrous tasks to perform, like this one, the crank. It was completely pointless, and yet they had to turn this 10,000 times a day. That's 1,200 an hour, once every 3 seconds, at this speed for 8 hours solid. And it doesn't do anything, it merely clocks up the numbers. What's more, every now and then a warder would come along and tighten up the screw to make it more difficult to do and harder work. That's why they were called screws. Only 9,947 to go.